Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. This is Mark Levine. I got to tell you, the time goes really fast. I devoted 6 hours to studying the abuse and torture of children and teens in the United States in these residential treatment facilities all across the nation. And I knew it wouldn't be enough, and it hasn't been enough. And so I apologize. A number of people are on the lines. I'm going to try to get to each and every one of you. I know a number of you tried to call in, and the lines are busy. I'm going to do the best I can. Before I get back to the phones, I do think it's important that you hear what the United States federal government has found about these things, because there always will be critics, people like Professor Yablonsky, who say, well, you know, these things work fine, and I just don't know about the other things. Well, there are some people who, like me, very much find persuasive all of the many people who've called into this show, who've talked to me on Facebook, who've posted on my website. To me, I see these hundreds of stories. They all sound very similar. They all sound awful, and I don't doubt any of you. But some want official studies. So I talked to a guy today that did an official study. This was a pre-taped interview that I did this morning. And I spoke with Greg Kutz. Now, he works for the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. This is the formal office of the federal government. When Congress wants a study, they do an objective study. It's not a partisan thing. It's not Democratic. It's not Republican. It's simply the facts. I want to play for you my interview with Greg Kutz, and also I want to let you know that the two studies that he did, I've posted on my site. Just go to marklevine.tv or marklevineradio.com. You got to refresh the page. You might want to do this after the show's over, and you will have links to those two studies that I talk about right now with Greg Kutz. Mr. Kutz, in 2007 and 2008, you drafted a report for the GAO on various residential treatment centers. Tell me how that came about. Why did you do that?
We did, as you mentioned, we started in 2007 looking at allegations regarding abuse and death of youth enrolled in residential treatment programs across the country. This was done for, at the time, the chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee, George Miller. As you may know, there's hundreds of these established across the United States, although no one really knows how many there are. But we did look into programs that offered, in many respects, to transform the lives of very troubled youths, and they were called at that time wilderness therapy, boot camps, academies, boarding schools, and things like that.
And what did you find in your report?
We found a number of things. Looking through 1990 through 2008, we found thousands of allegations of death and abuse in the United States, many related to private programs. The data was actually combined private and public both. We found, and we drilled down on 18 cases that were adjudicated from 1990 to 2006, and mostly civil cases, and we found ineffective management had contributed to the death, and in many cases the abuse of children, mostly youth from the ages of 12 to 18. The kinds of things I'm talking about are hiring of untrained staff, lack of adequate nourishment, kids that were basically starved, negligent operating practices, and physical restraint that in some cases cause death, and this is mostly face-down physical restraint.
Now, did you hear about deprivation of sleep or locking people into rooms, not allowing them out for periods of time, refusing to let people use the bathroom, things like that?
There were cases of that, yes.
And part of the thing that people have talked about on this show is the fact that a lot of times the staff wouldn't be around. They'd allow the kids themselves to train or discipline, and in some cases harshly, other kids. Did you find that in your report?
There was at least one case like that where the counselors had the other kids punish someone who supposedly had done something wrong by beating them up, and that was one of the cases I do recall. And there may have been others, but I distinctly recall one where a youth had broken their arm, actually, and rather than provide medical attention, they actually had the other kids beat this kid up.
Okay, so Congressman Miller asked you to draft this report as head of the House Labor Education Committee. You did so. What were the results of this report? Did anything come out of it?
Well, again, we reported on 18 cases, and we found very troubling practices there. I think in one of the hearings I referred to these as human rights violations, the kind of things that you would find in a third world country happening in our country. In addition to the issues related to the death and abuse of the children, we found also deceptive marketing practices where some, and again, we don't know how many programs there are, we can't project our results beyond the cases we looked at, but some of these places took advantage of desperate parents who were looking for somewhat of a last-ditch effort to help what was a troubled child at that time.
And what were the results? So Congressman Miller asked you to do this report. You gave a very detailed report, at least on these 18 cases. I'm going to post it on my website so that people can take a look at it themselves. You had some hearings on it. What happened? I think the House passed a bill, Congressman Miller's bill, but it didn't get through the Senate to regulate these things?
That's correct.
So no congressional law was passed. Was anything done in the executive branch or anywhere else, local authorities, to look into these cases of abuse and to shut down some of these abusive treatment centers?
I think the primary positive result, in addition to Congress being more informed and the draft legislation, was just public awareness, and I think there's been an increased public awareness. The two hearings that were held, one in 2007 and one in 2008, did receive quite widespread attention. But whether anything has actually changed in the short term, I really don't know. And as you mentioned, consequences with respect to the individuals involved in abuse of children and in some cases death, there were 2 convictions in the 18 cases that we looked at, but the rest of the people, there were very few consequences to these acts.
Convictions of murder, torture?
There was 1 conviction for manslaughter and aggravated assault, and there was another for third-degree assault. One person served a number of years, and the other one got a month in prison. The rest of the people, there may have been some probation and community service, but mostly what we saw were civil settlements for anywhere from $200,000 to over $1 million.
And, of course, you looked into, I believe, hundreds or even thousands of allegations, right? I mean, it wasn't, you looked at 18 centers, but there were a large number of allegations, correct?
There were thousands of allegations. We drilled down on the 18 specific cases. You know, we looked at autopsy reports, police reports. We interviewed people, and we did all those kinds of things. And on the deceptive marketing, we did our own original undercover work, actually posing as parents of troubled kids.
And when you did that, what did they tell you?
Well, there were some interesting things. For example, in one case, we were told that they had a stringent application process. And the next thing you know, we didn't apply. We received an acceptance letter by email.
That's hardly a stringent process.
No. In another case, there was just one other case. There was an interesting. It was a referral service. A lot of these places have referral services or front companies that are doing marketing, and they kept referring our kids with different problems to the same school. As it turned out, the husband-wife, one was operating the referral service, the other was operating a school, and of course they weren't telling the people calling on the phone that this was actually one organization.
Nice. So when you did these reports, you raised some public awareness. Are you aware of some of these facilities being shut down, or are they still being run today?
Based on the last look, there were some that have been shut down. Whether it had a result from this or not, I don't know, but there were some that were still open. Again, I haven't looked in several years, so I don't know which of these may be open today. But some had already been closed when we started our work. Others were open then and have subsequently closed, and I believe there are still some open. And, you know, these people move around. Once they move from one place to another, unless they adequately disclose some of the past things, if there's no conviction, if someone does a background check, they're going to look clean. They're probably operating at other ones right now in some cases and maybe doing some of the same things.
Now, since Congressman Miller's bill didn't pass, is there no federal regulation of these facilities?
Generally, no. I mean, some of the actual deaths took place on federal land, and I don't really believe that the Forest Service and others that owned it were completely aware. So there's fees and usage charges and things like that. So there was some federal nexus on that, but no, there really, I don't think overall has been a change. Don't know if there are more or less of these places today.
Did you examine state regulators? Are they watching over these? Are any states particularly good or particularly bad in regulating these facilities?
For example, Utah, where some of the early programs started, had some incidents early on, and they then increased government oversight, state government, and regulations. So some of the states that had some of the early boot camps and other types of programs that actually had issues that were raised and got a lot of publicity did improve some of their processes. But you basically would have at least 50 sets of processes across the country, and within certain states perhaps even lower levels of oversight that vary.
Greg, last night and tonight we've been hearing just repeated witness accounts by people who are in these programs, and including some parents who right now are very concerned because their children are in these programs. And my question for you is, what can they do? What legal remedies do they have?
I don't know about legal remedies, but certainly they need to do significant due diligence on the front end as to who they're dealing with and what kind of I think actually the Federal Trade Commission put out a pamphlet on questions parents should ask when they are actually looking to hire one of these places. They have to be very careful before they put their child in these programs. The cost of these, when we were looking at it, was anywhere from $3,000 per month to $13,000 per month.
Okay, but I'm going to press you on this because there's some very anguished parents out there. They didn't do the due diligence they should have done, and certainly what you said is a good lesson for people in the future. But it's not just parents, it's relatives. They know that in some cases, for example, a child, a niece or a nephew or a cousin has been signed over by parents who are not that competent to these facilities, who actually become their guardians, and they hear all these stories of abuse. What can they do? Can they go to the police? Can they go to their district attorneys? Can they go to their legislators, all of the above? They're really trying to find some answers here, and I'm hoping you can help me with that.
Well, all of those are certainly possibilities. I wish I could say there was a silver bullet and something that is real specific that can solve everyone's problems, but it's going to be case by case, and there is no real great solution for these problems except certainly on the front end. And if you find your child in one of these programs and, for example, the program won't let you talk to them on the phone, you get them out of there. There's certain things that should be in place for the parents to provide some assurance that their loved ones are being handled appropriately. And the stories of the 18 cases we looked at were absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, some of the things that we've been hearing in case after case, in fact, it's a repeated theme in all of these, is that the kids are not allowed to talk to their parents. In fact, sometimes they're only allowed a 6-minute monitored conversation, frankly, which reminds me of the way it used to work in the Soviet Union, where you couldn't call unless they monitored the phone calls. This cult-like behavior, isn't there a way that a parent or even a concerned relative can go to the authorities, go to the judge, call a crisis center, and say, hey, if we can't freely talk to this child, that's abuse in and of itself, because a lot of times they can't prove what's going on inside because they can't freely talk to the child.
Right. I think it's going to vary state by state. As I mentioned, there's probably 50 sets of state regulations and rules on this. You're going to have to look at each state. But, yeah, you need to act quickly if there's signs that there's something going on with your child. And you're right. And actually the bill you talked about that passed the House had provisions in there that required free access to the phones for kids in these camps. So that's something that if you find that that's not happening, that would be a red flag.
One last thing, a number of kids, they're now adults, but they tell me the stories what happened to them as kids, although some of them it happened to them just recently, young adults, tell me that they escaped the facilities, literally by doing things like jumping off roofs, breaking through windows, pulling fire alarms, extreme behavior, trying to escape what for them was worse than any prison camp. And in many cases, the police and others simply turned them back over to the same people who'd been abusing and torturing them. If someone gets free and calls 911, what can they say so that they don't get turned over to the very people that are torturing and abusing them? In other words, if they say 911, these people are abusing me, they are physically abusing me, is there a way that they can be protected and not sent back to the very people they claim are torturing them?
Well, absent going directly to your parents or your guardians, you would hope that law enforcement authorities would take seriously those kinds of allegations. You know, the kinds of the cases we saw, there was physical evidence of abuse. I'm talking about serious bruises, contusions, broken bones, etc. So you would think in the serious cases there's going to be physical evidence of the abuse. And in the cases we saw, I read the autopsy reports. I saw the pictures. I mean, it was gruesome. So I would hope that there's enough physical evidence in those cases. I mean, if it's just mental or some sort of emotional control type situation, that's going to be harder. But when there's physical abuse, there are cases we did see that there was evidence of that.
I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your work, and my hope is that this show and your work together will help persuade members of Congress this is something that really needs to be regulated. Thank you so much for coming on the air and talking with us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this for the parents and the kids.
Powerful stuff. I was thinking as I was listening that maybe child abuse centers that are used to hearing about parents that abuse their children, maybe they're the ones to call. I wish I had better answers, but I hope you appreciate the interview. When we come back, I've got a statement from Congressman Miller, who was unable to attend tonight but did leave a statement, and connections to Mitt Romney.